I'm with the crew from Game, Set and Bet, and Wimbledon's behind us, Crina and Sara. A fun tournament, I suppose, had its moments. I get though the impression from the both of you the last couple of weeks that you're not huge fans of Wimbledon. Why? Explain to me the reasons. Is it anti-English bias?
Yeah, 100%. That's where it starts for me. No, but I think you'll agree with me when I say some of the traditions that have been kept are dated with we've spoke about wearing the all white. Also, the way they treated the Russian and Belarusian players, I didn't agree with that at all. So that put a bit of a sour taste in my mouth for this year specifically. And then, the rankings, the whole ranking system being deducted, the players, I felt like they weren't gaining anything. Of course, money, but they also want to, further their rankings in their career. So there's several things I feel.
Yeah, even Novak Djokovic won the entire thing, and his ranking went down by 4 spots today. So he fell to number 7 in the world, which is.
That is ridiculous.
Ridiculous, considering he just won the tournament. So yeah, just a lot of things, like Sara mentioned, a lot of things that need to be changed. I feel like they're very rooted in their tradition, but in a very, very stubborn and excluding or discriminating way.
Right. So it's not so much about just this tournament this year.
Yeah.
It's the overall All England club, the traditions. They're old-fashioned essentially, right? But the tournament itself, it still seems to mean a lot to the players. We heard old Nick Kyrgios during the meltdown over the woman who had 700 drinks. He was saying to the umpire, listen, this is the Wimbledon final. It gets no bigger. Do you think the players, if they can remove their issues with the dress codes, still see Wimbledon as being the major Grand Slam?
Yeah, I think so. I think they do hold a lot of pride with that tournament. I'm thinking to when Simona Halep won in 2019, she said that one meant more to her than the French Open did, because there's a certain kind of air surrounding this tournament, that it's very fancy, and that you haven't really made it in the tennis world until you've won here. And, after you win, you are invited to be in the club afterwards. So yeah, I think players still hold it in a high regard, whether or not that's political or personal.
It's the oldest tournament as well, right? So, it has all that history. And if you think about tennis, there's only 4 major Grand Slams. So there's not much to choose from if you're just thinking about the 4 anyways. So I think with its history and just the fact that you have to pick probably one.
100 years too, right? It's quite amazing, it is. But I understand what you're saying. Back to the games this weekend, Nick Kyrgios in particular really put up a good fight, I thought, in what was a really entertaining final. And in the end, Djokovic does what Djokovic does. But were you impressed how, I won't say that Kyrgios kept his head, right? Because he didn't.
Yeah.
But he didn't melt down to the extent that we've seen him do in the past.
Yeah, I don't think he needed to though this time. I think there have been other things that have egged him on in the past. I don't think it got to that point necessarily in the match on Sunday. I think he also holds a lot of respect for Djokovic. I think their relationship played a big part in this final. Because I think if it was someone that he either wasn't close with or didn't cared about or potentially even looked down on, because I think he's that kind of player, I think we'd see a very different match.
I agree, yeah, and I don't know. I just feel like with Kyrgios, the problem is that it's not that he's not a good tennis player. He's a very excellent tennis player, but he loses his focus very easily. It's those little things that set him off, and so he came out winning the first set. But then everything kind of fell apart after that with little things going on, where there was that woman in the audience, like you mentioned, or, whatever it was. So I think part of it is right. I think him and Djokovic have a good relationship, and that's definitely a major factor in how focused you are in a match.
Who was he screaming at, by the way? Was it his box? Was it his sister?
Player box.
It was his player box, yeah.
And he does that a fair amount.
Yeah,
but
a lot of players do that.
But it upsets me, it angers me, because it was his fault. It wasn't his sister's fault, right? There are a lot of unforced errors, I thought, coming from his racket. Yet he's blaming his box. I mean, maybe that's just how he gets rid of his frustration. But that side of things frustrates me. But at the same time, I think sport needs its villains, right? And I think you mentioned it, Sara, on Friday, how this was almost like villain against villain. Who was the biggest villain? I thought Djokovic had the biggest support in centre court on that day, it felt like. But do you think the sport does need this? These colourful characters. Kyrgios, as childish and churlish as he can be, it's also pretty good for the game because it was box office. You couldn't turn away.
I think that's the thing. I mean, Crina and I are tennis fans regardless, so I think we would watch the sport. But I also noticed, at least on my Twitter feed, many people that might have not been watching this were watching this because they know who he is and they wanted to see a reaction. So like I think you are right. We definitely need villains. Now that being said, Kyrgios with his whole, domestic charge, like I think there are lines. Him being, rude on the court, having these outbursts, like I'm all fine with that. Like not that I'm fine, but he does bring more viewership to the game. But I think you have to know when that line is crossed. And that's what I'm like uneasy about him still.
I totally agree. I think, you and I think very diehard tennis fans would be okay with the tennis regardless of personalities, but I think tennis needs, especially now, is like making tennis cool again, and you need kind of those like personalities to draw interest, and especially with players like Serena Williams and Naomi Osaka kind of out right now on a bit of a hiatus. I think that players like Kyrgios drawing interest is probably important for the game.
It's a great point. It seems on the men's side there are more characters right now. The women's side have had them in the past. Serena was one of the biggest characters, but like I said, she's declining now. So, what must be done on the women's side? It seems pretty bland right now. Is that unfair? I mean, you guys are hardcore. I'm an observer.
Struck a chord there.
Too many Romanians. How can they be bland, right? But it seems like they're missing that kind of X factor right now in the women's game.
I think I'll start here because I think actually there's two ways to look at this. One, when Serena Williams was playing, she was the most dominant. Nobody could kind of go up against her really, and people were super interested in that. However, ever since she's kind of like gotten off the court a little bit, there's been different champions for different tournaments. There hasn't really been one person to dominate, unless it's Iga Swiatek recently. So I think that's been good for the game because you're learning about new players, and I think if you're more of a diehard tennis fan, it's better because you're understanding and learning more of these players. But I don't know. I personally don't think women's tennis needs a character like that. I don't think men's tennis needs a character like that, but that's just because I'm just so into the sport.
Yeah, I agree though. I think what Crina's saying with like how there's been almost a new championship every like Grand Slam, like there hasn't been someone super consistent like Serena was. I think they also all have like a lot of respect for each other, and they also like have fluctuated so much that for one of them to, have like an attitude, let's say like Kyrgios, it wouldn't really make sense because no one's been that dominant character. But that also like I know like Halep is your girl, but I do think she actually has Halep has a big character when she's playing.
Yeah.
Off the court, she's very like composed, but when she's playing, she'll smash rackets, she screams, she gets angry. So like
that Romanian stubbornness.
I think there are some characters. They just can't live up to Kyrgios because he is a special, special man.
Yeah, it's a bit like McEnroe back in the day, right?
Yeah.
But McEnroe was at least winning Grand Slams.
And he was commentating on Kyrgios' match, which I found very ironic.
Very ironic.
He was criticizing him too, and I was like,
I've heard him criticize him in the past and thinking that's the popcorn, the kettle black there, Mac.
Yep.
Because there was no one worse than him. He would just scream at umpires, and it's before you guys are born. I know that. But I grew up watching the
We're still
McEnroe.
familiar with
You're
it.
familiar, right? But there were colourful characters, but there were the Edbergs who were boring as hell. And even Pete Sampras wasn't much fun. He was a machine out there. But then you had Agassi, had some colour there, right? So I think you need to sprinkle in some colour with the blandness. That's all I'm saying, right? All I'm saying. I'm in a lot of trouble now. But great work, by the way. Very quickly, US Open. I know it's still July, but who's going to win, men and women, very quickly?
Okay, Simona Halep and Rafael Nadal.
Rafa and Iga.
Okay, obviously he's lucky, but
Okay.
probably won't even be there, will he? So thank you very much. Great job. That is tennis. That is a game, set, and bet.